get started. Thanks so much for coming. This is our journal editors panel. We've lined up a real set of VIPs here to tell you all the secrets. All of the secrets. On that note, Chris is filming. However, please be frank. Please ask all the questions that you really want to know. The editors will give you frank answers. If there's a comment or question that you ask that you would not like to appear in the filming of this session, that's fine. Just come and tell Chris afterwards and he will delete it. So please speak frankly, speak from the heart, ask what you really want to know, because we want this session to be as useful as possible. So I've asked each of the editors before you here to briefly introduce themselves and to make also a brief comment about any advice that they might have for all of you about interdisciplinary work and how their journal handles interdisciplinarity, which we all know is always difficult and fraught. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. Stephanie, would you like to begin?
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for coming. Unsurprisingly, I work at a business school and I have slides. I think the rest of the editors probably don't. But I'll impose a view for one more PowerPoint, which I'm sure is not unexpected. My computer left me. There we go. So I'm here obviously to present for business history. Business history, hopefully familiar. Sometimes I get questions about Business History Review. We're essentially the UK Business History Journal. Business History Review is, I'm sure many of you know, it's US based. So we're one of the Taylor and Francis journals. We're probably one of the biggest journals in the field, and for us really today what we want to make sure we tell everybody is that we very much consider ourselves a broad church type journal. So very interdisciplinary, very open to lots of different ways of interpreting business history, though within some constraints. We get some math stuff, probably most journals do, but we do as well. So we have certain ideas about what we think the field is, but as it says, we are trying to take a very open and broad approach that accommodates lots of different approaches to the field. So for us, it's really important that we encourage authors that come from lots of different institutions, departments, disciplinary backgrounds, and that's why I have the slides. I wanted to quickly take you through what kind of disciplinary backgrounds we found our authors actually have. But we're still a historical journal, so we're quite social science oriented, but for us it's really important that we're still a history journal and that we're still interested in new knowledge about the past, new ways of looking at the past of business and other organizations. Now what we find sometimes that causes confusion, largely because we're quite an interdisciplinary journal, so when we get business school submissions or pure history submissions, we find authors come at the same questions with very different assumptions. So hence we've recently published a couple of editorials to try and really clarify where we see the space for what is a broad church journal, but you know, there's some lines. Now the first of these editorials that I think would be relevant for you is really the Revise and Resubmit editorial, where we kind of try to set out what we try to achieve through our editorial processes, how we like to sort of work with our reviewers, what you can expect as an editor, as an author from your editor, but also from the reviewers, and also why we would like you to sign up as a reviewer to bring our field further forward. So that editorial is out, and I would also encourage you to look at some of the comments. This is the current issue at the moment. We've invited fellow editors to actually discuss a little bit the ideas in the editorial, because we also wanted to open up the debate as to what do we do as a journal to encourage submissions, and how do we actually work with the submissions with the authors to improve the research you sent to us. So we got Andrew Popp as the editor Enterprise and Society, as well as Anders Ram Sorensen, who is Management Organizational History, which is our sister journal with Taylor and Francis. But also we have Marion Issad White, who works for, is one of the editors-in-chief for International Journal of Management Reviews, so one of the major management journals, as well as Dirk Lindebaum from Academy of Management Learning and Education. And I think that sort of also reflects where we see ourselves as a field, that we also engage with social sciences and also want to ensure we bring different ideas from these other disciplines into business history. And to give you a quick overview, this is really why I wanted to have slides, is we looked at the last couple of years to see where do our authors come from, because we had a lot of debates. Who publishes in business history? Is it still historians? Is it basically management scholars? And what we found is that there is a large proportion of colleagues in business and management, reflect also changes in the UK. So about 40% of our authors do come from business schools. We have a large proportion of colleagues still, about 20% from history. And then economics and economic history are around another 22% in terms of our author base. And then we have various other smaller departments often associated with special issues. And I think that tells us a lot about the kind of broad church journal we try to be. We try to be at the intersection between social sciences, history, and all of that, focused on organizations and business and what we know about them, what we know about their past. So our aim is really to have a strong emphasis on interdisciplinary engagement through our peer review process and editorial processes. So for example, we recently had a special issue, say, in the Middle East to bring forward more work on other regions of the world. But for example, now there's my department's hosting a conference, AIB MENA, which is one of the sub-chapters for Academy of International Business. So we would also encourage business historians interested in the region, interested in these kind of subjects around sustainability and digitization, to submit to that, to really facilitate a better interdisciplinary integration across the social sciences. Looking forward, we are obviously looking forward to submissions possibly from this conference, potentially also perhaps special issues, where I think we have a roster of really great special issues coming up. I wanted to make you aware we now move to an annual process. So every September we now invite competitive applications for special issues, because we get a lot. They're really good, and we want to continue publishing high impact special issues going forward. And you can be guaranteed to get a lot of feedback on any submission you send to us, which is what we do through this annual process. Very happy to answer any questions about that going forward. And to give you an idea of the special issues we currently have accepted, I think that gives you a bit of a sense of the range of subjects and topics we're interested in. We have something on female entrepreneurship, on work on the absence of archives for certain regions in which we don't have so much business history. A classic sort of Chandler Redux, looking at, you know, one of the classic authors of business history, as well as globalization, economic nationalism, and big business, one of the sort of evergreens, I would say, of business historical research. And we also have a new editorial out that literally came out at the start of the week, talking about how you can look into the contributions we like to accept in the journal. So if you're interested in that, if you go on this barcode, you see a quick summary of that particular editorial. We're really trying to talk about not just what we have published, but also what we aim to publish in the future, and what kind of contributions we hope will be relevant for the field going forward. So thank you very much. I'll stop here.
Yeah, does this work?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Shane Hamilton. I'm associate editor at Enterprise and Society. Andrew Pop is not with us, so I'm standing in, or sitting in, as it turns out. Enterprise and Society is, I would say, of the leading business and management history journals, the one that's most focused on making connections specifically to historians. And that is historians who don't define themselves primarily as business historians, first and foremost. In fact, I remember, and so one thing important to understand about Enterprise Society is it's produced by and originated by the Business History Conference, a US-based organization. And I distinctly remember my first visit to the Business History Conference. It was at the dissertation prize, the PhD dissertation prize, and I announced as my first thing that I didn't think I was a business historian. And in my mind, as I look back on that, I remember everyone giving a big slow clap. Which probably didn't actually happen. But it reflected that, you know, the PhD is primarily composed of people who are not in business management schools, who are in history departments. And I think in many ways the PhD as an organization was founded on the premise that people who do business and economic history needed a kind of legitimacy and a sense of support that is not often there in the kind of mainstream history world. So that's kind of the angle that I think has always been motivating the creation of Enterprise and Society and the kinds of papers that tend to get published. That, as Andrew put it to me in an email, that the most common reason for a desk reject at Enterprise and Society, which another thing kind of contextually here, we consider ourselves to be a nice journal, that we really want to help develop authors. So desk rejects are actually not particularly common. And when they do happen, it's almost always because the paper is not historical. Like it is maybe history informed in the sense that it's very light gloss with almost no sources, but kind of grand claims about what happened in the past. And we look at that, we're just like, no, thank you. This is not the right journal. So there's an expectation of, intensive, primary, original source research. That isn't to say that we only publish work by historians, however. We've published quite a bit by sociologists, anthropologists, geographers, people who engage, as long as they're engaging with history in a meaningful sense. If it's delivered in a narrative form, it's thickly contextualized. If it's a work of professional historical scholarship, it has every chance of being published in the journal. I thought, these are my thoughts. I don't know what Andrew would think about this. I'm not exactly sure why we do that. I think that in that, it is problematic in terms of the market, right? That, as you say, the trend has been for business historians increasingly to be in business and management schools rather than history departments, which in the US and in the UK are declining. Enrollments are not growing. So maybe that will have to change as we go forward. But again, it really is rooted in that the Business History Conference as an organization, its commitment to really supporting and creating a network of development for, primarily in North America, the scholars who do business history are based in history departments. So really supporting them and, advocating for understanding business as a social and political phenomenon as much as an economic one, which is also perhaps a distinction with some of the other journals. Just to kind of put a personal gloss on that, when I taught in the US history department, I never taught a business history class or anything remotely like it. I taught things like technology and American culture, food and power, general American history. I never taught anything that was called business history, even though within those, of course, I did a lot of what we call business history. Members of the BHC, I think, tend to be pretty similar, that many of them teach labor history, social history, cultural history. So they do engage with business, but they don't teach business history per se. Another reason maybe that we have our particular slant is differentiation. I think that we, this table is maybe indicative of it, that we let many flowers bloom. The more good journals there are publishing business history, the better for all of us, right? So we don't want them to all be the same. And so being the kind of most history-focused journal, I think, is our unique selling point, if you will. And then another factor clearly is actually just the personnel, that the two most recent editors, Phil Scranton and Andrew Popp, by and large tilt more towards the humanities side of history than the social science side of history as a discipline. I don't have slides, but I do have we don't have the excellent numbers that you have, or the excellent editorials that tell people exactly what we're looking for. But a couple of years ago, for an internal thing we did at York, I ran some numbers covering the period that I've been associate editor, so from 2015 to 2022, and I haven't updated them, I should have. This is just to kind of indicate what we have published, but again, we're very much open to pretty much anything, as long as it's historical and engages with enterprise. Overwhelmingly, geographically, our publications have been focused on the US and Western Europe. Some 75% of publications have been US and Western Europe. Not necessarily saying that's a good thing. We'd like to see more geographies represented. The next two largest, by contrast, are transnational or comparative, which are only 7%, and East Asia, which is 7%. I categorized all these articles by themes. The four most common industries represented were finance and insurance at 25% of articles, general or unspecified at 19%, because these are more kind of political, which we'll get to in a minute. Manufacturing, which is 18%, and agri-food, 7%, which of course I'm happy about. Chronologically, almost overwhelmingly post-1850. About 42% cover the century between 1850 and 1950, and about 47% 1950 to the present. There was only one pre-1500 article published during that period. 5 kind of core approaches that people take. Some 28% of articles were business history in a firm-focused way. 22% were business history in a more social context kind of way. But then 23% were much more what I would categorize as political history, effectively. 13% economic history, and 9% cultural or intellectual history. And then again, this wasn't super systematic, but I noted some gaps. We have published surprisingly little on entrepreneurship and innovation, which is kind of striking given that Andrew Pop is a historian of entrepreneurship. We published almost nothing on supply chains, although I don't think that's our fault. I think that's a kind of maybe discipline-wide issue. And also very little on ethics and corporate governance. Again, though, we welcome anything, there's many gaps that can be filled in the publishing.
Okay, so thank you, Shane. So I'm Dr. Kevin Tennant, and I'm the Associate Editor of Journal of Management History. So I suppose we're somewhat of a different journal to Enterprise and Society in that we're probably at the other end of the scale from that, in that really we are a sort of journal really oriented to people that do management history and business history in business schools, in a sense, and that the journal really came out of the management history division at the Academy of Management, and it still has its annual board meetings there every year. And it has historically, to some extent, been focused around the kind of community in the USA that look at that kind of topic areas. It's a very different tradition, actually, of management history in the US to the BHC kind of tradition. And weirdly, these two communities barely know of each other, which I find really interesting. But yeah, the journal itself has been over the certainly the last couple of editors, has been trying to become more international in form. So it has typically tended to be focused on US topics to a certain extent, and that's in some ways inevitable in terms of the way that management theory has developed. But yeah, the journal's kind of main sort of topic areas really are kind of twofold. So one of them is thinking about management as a profession and the history of management as a profession, and in that the history of management theory as well. So there's quite a lot of intellectual kind of history there. There's quite a lot of theory looking at, as you'd expect, things like Taylorism, people like Elton Mayo, all these kinds of topics and ideas. And then at the other hand, there is also increasing stream of research in the journal, which is more around the doing of management history or the doing of business history that is in some way theoretically motivated, that is in some way making a theoretical contribution. So all of the papers that we publish are in some way theoretically related. So they all have an empirical side, or a lot of them have an empirical side. And so it's, and that's usually kind of archival history or oral history done via interviews. But then what we're looking for quite often is some form of conversation with theory or some kind of theoretical contribution or something like this coming from it as well quite often, or telling us something about a theory or the history of a theory as well. I would say that the thing that people most often don't quite get right in terms of submitting to our journal is that they're going far too far the other way. So in terms of submitting things that don't have history in them, that's again inevitably a way to get rejected from our journal. But I would say the reason that they often do that is because they submit a literature review of something without ever actually mentioning the history of it, or that it doesn't have, if you like, historical integrity. So so we get a lot of people coming from sort of business skills backgrounds who make the mistake of thinking that business history or management history is kind of the building of literature reviews around topics in some ways, and that's not what we're about. We're interested in furthering our understanding of these topics in history, and also perhaps a kind of theoretical kind of background to them. In terms of kind of the sort of diversity of topics in the journal as well. So although it has been to some extent an American oriented, and it still remains a journal that has that connection to the Academy of Management network, although a kind of informal one. That's a useful network to be in globally because scholars from around the world look to come to the AOM to talk to each other, and this means that our editorial board is quite diverse, has people from a lot of different countries on it. We're also kind of making progress in terms of the status of the journal in continental Europe, so we're going up kind of journal lists in France and Italy, and this kind of thing as well. So we're kind of quite well rated in a number of different countries, and we're trying actively to get into conversations about management history in different countries. So for some reason recently, I've had an upsurge of submissions looking at Turkey. I'm not quite sure why this is, but it's good that Turkey is a country that people are discussing more, because again, it's a big economy, a lot of people are there. Poland is another one, which seems to be coming up more often as well, for example. So it's not just conversations about English-speaking countries, and of course there's a lot to say there, and all of that kind of thing, but it's also, it's also kind of expanding it into different countries and different kinds of conversations as well. And so you know, if you're a person that thinks, well, I'm working on a certain country, and how do I position my research, and think about that, and how you could get into broader theoretical conversations through that. I would say we're asked to say a little bit about interdisciplinarity, and I would say that our kind of big selling point is that in terms of interdisciplinarity, I suppose history and management is inherently kind of interdisciplinary, but we have all sorts of different theory type topics, if you like, and functional areas of management coming up. So again, traditionally there's tended to be an emphasis never in things like industrial psychology or human relations and these kinds of things, but we're getting more kind of accounting history these days, for example. We're getting papers that can kind of interface with strategic management more and more, also things like EDI as well, so and kind of justice or social justice in organizations and this kind of thing. So a few years ago, we did a special issue on black business in America, for example, and that's kind of increased the kind of interest that we had. I did a special issue on ethical business a couple of years ago as well. We do have special issues as well, it's worth mentioning, and we have one every year usually, and the editor-in-chief, Jeffrey Muldoon, kind of handles the kind of application process for that, but I've done a couple of them over time, and it's quite a good job to work with as well for special issues. And having that kind of international presence is really useful, and it's really quite a good platform. Emerald is a publisher, and you might think it's kind of another kind of American corporation, but actually it's based in Yorkshire, in Bingley, and they're quite friendly and supportive publishers as well. So that's kind of I didn't even know myself, because until I set up a book series with them, which is another story, but we publish books. But anyway, yeah, we or kind of representatives of them were from America, and then I thought, oh, actually it's British. So anyway, but yeah, it's a nice thing about it as well. So yeah, so it's a good journal, and we'd like to encourage more submissions from business historians who are interested in broader histories of business as well as kind of management in a functional sense as well, because we want to kind of increase the diversity of what appears in the journal, as long as it has a conversation with theory, essentially, in some way. Okay.
Okay, thanks. I'm Simon Mullen. I'm now the sole editor of Essays in Economic and Business History, because Mark Billings has just stood down as co-editor with me. Essays in Economic and Business History is wholly owned by the Economic and Business History Society, the conference that we're at, and it covers all areas of economic and business history, broadly conceived. It's a very plural space. That said, I would say about 2/3 of the articles that we publish are probably in the field of, or consider them to be economic history. About 1/3 you probably consider to be business history. There's no hard or fast rule about that, it's just that's the nature of the submissions that we get. And we of course want to see submissions from as many of you that would like to submit, who are interested in all kinds of genres of economic and business history. So a couple of things I want to say. The first thing is around interdisciplinarity, is that our journal is very open to interdisciplinary endeavour, whether it's intersectional with another discipline or field, or whether it's the use of different theoretical methodological perspectives. That's all absolutely fine. What I would say is around interdisciplinarity is that there has to, interdisciplinary contribution has to be in conversation or dialogue in some way with historical research. It has to be undertaking historical research as we would all kind of conceive it. The majority of the articles that we publish are empirically based research articles, of course, but we do also publish comments and notes and review articles, and we welcome submissions in all of those areas as well. We also have special issues. We've had 2 recent special issues most recent one has been about economic history in dialogue with Austrian economics, and also in line with our commitment to equality and diversity, we also had a special issue, the economic and business history of Black Americans, that was published early this year, wasn't it, Mark? November last year. So yeah, I think I want to hear questions from you really. So I don't think I have at this point anything more to add. But yeah, we welcome your submissions from all of you and from people attending this conference.
Thank you guys, that was super valuable and helpful. Let's thank our editors. Okay, we're gonna now open it up to questions from all of you. Please ask what you want to know. We'll start right over here. And we have a microphone, we're gonna give it a shot. If it doesn't work, just yell.
I love this. Can you hear me okay? Excellent. Yes, I was wondering, how are special issues generally announced for each of your journals, and how can we, as researchers, authors, find out about them and what the topics are upcoming, just generally?
Right. So if you have an idea for a special issue that you'd like to pitch to Essays in Economic Business History, just email me with an outline of what it might be, and we can have a conversation about how that would work. What typically would happen is that if it was something which was in fit with the journal, which if it was Economic and Business History, it would be, I would work with potential guest editors to craft corporate papers, which would be issued on the journal website with a deadline, and the process would then work in a kind of normal peer review process of getting articles through the review process that we have. So that would be how it worked. Yeah, and we would then issue the corporate papers, through as many distribution channels as possible to get the strongest possible feed.
Yeah, more or less the same thing for us, really. So I would say as well that it needs to be a topic that fits into the broad aims and scope of the journal in some way. So I think that's the thing. So if it was kind of histories that interacted with a certain management topic or something like that, then that would be a really good way to do it. Something along those lines. But yeah, so talk to the editor-in-chief about it. I think there's usually a kind of a queue of 2 or 3 years worth of essays to come, of course, that's the only thing, but there's a reasonably open attitude to it, because it's trying to kind of, especially I think the other thing would be topics that haven't come up in the journal before in some, in terms of being dealt with in a special issue as well, are quite welcome. So that's yeah.
Yeah, in terms of special issues, we haven't done very many of them, and we're not as organized as Business History about this. But it is the kind of thing when someone has a good idea that we work with them to develop that. In terms of, but your specific question is about how do you actually know about it. One thing, if you're not signed up to H Business, I would certainly sign up to that. Yeah, you've got the Organizational History Network. Sign up to that as well. Yeah, you can tell more. Yeah, I would say that the easiest way to kind of know what's going on is through those kind of announcement channels. So if you're a Business History Conference member, there's a kind of newsletter that gets circulated. The ABH has a newsletter, right? So these things, they tend to be circulated that way. Because going to a website, a journal website, you have to kind of know what you're looking for, right? So yeah, I dial into social media and so forth.
Same for us, we have a Twitter account actually.
For us, they should be on the website. I've got to say, Taylor and Francis isn't always as fast as we'd like them to upload them, so sometimes you get them through social media before they appear on our website, so we have raised that, and hopefully that'll change very soon. Organizational History Network, I just sort of started running this and I'm sort of locked into it, so whenever somebody sends me a CFG, I pass it on. I'm totally agnostic about the journal, so I just try to make sure that if there's interesting stuff happening, I push it through. Anybody can subscribe to that. Or special issues in business history, I mean, we're probably at the more organized end, simply because business history has always done a lot of special issues. So what we do now is really, when we request these proposals, we've now gone to once a year, we've gone to a competition. The moment we started going to a competition, we started getting more proposals, which, I mean, tells you everything about, scarcity and the desirability of scarcity. So one of the things in which we try to balance this is by making sure that you get very substantive comments on the special issue proposal from all of the editorial boards. We score it by a range of criteria. It's all on the website, so we try to be really transparent. You can resubmit, and we sometimes also simply make suggestions, say, well, maybe this would fit better with a different business history journal. So we do tend to see it not as a one-shot thing, and if you're not with us, we don't care what happens to your special issue proposal. So, yeah, we realize it's a really important part as business historians move into business schools. There's less edited volumes, and I think special issues are very much absorbing that space, perhaps, that the edited volume used to hold for the field.
Good question up front here.
Oh, I hope you don't mind me plugging management and organisational history. I thought I should, because I'm sitting next to a former editor, and I'm a former and founding editor of the Journal of Management and Organisational History. And I think all the journals are slightly differentiated. That's not to say if you got a paper rejected from one, you shouldn't try another.
Just don't make it too obvious.
But change it a bit, because you might find the same reviewers. It does happen, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So to position management and organisational history, we've been going for nearly 20 years. Nearly 20 years. And when we proposed the journal, it was very much that business history was much more empirical, deferential to economics, more rooted in history departments, and organisation studies was less open to historical research. Fortunately, both of those things have changed. Management and organisation studies much more receptive to history, which is great. But I think the journal has opened up that space to some extent. You know, we published some of the first papers on historical history, which are now highly cited, and more reflexive papers on methods. And I think we still continue with that. I'm currently editing a special issue, which hopefully is just about wrapped up, on microhistory and management history. So there's 4 or even 5 journals to think about, all slightly different. Thank you.
Thanks for that. More questions from the audience? Oh, there we go.
Thank you for a great panel. Just wondering, it's the question that has to be asked, it's probably going to have a difficult answer, but what are your journal's advice for students, early career researchers, first-time publishers? What are just the basic, here's how you build your momentum towards publication? Thank you.
I'll just get started. Thank you. It's a really good question, and I think one of the things we have tried to sort of flag a little bit more on social media is that we're really happy for, say, doctoral students to start becoming reviewers with us, because we think that's sort of the first step to sort of understand what will happen to a manuscript when you submit it, because this ability to go to the other side of the process, I think, is quite enabling for a doctoral student. What we do in that case is normally we operate with 2 reviewers, where we have a more junior reviewer, we have them as a 3rd reviewer, but if you receive 3 reviews, it doesn't mean necessarily one of them is a PhD student. Although, if it is, you probably know the PhD student by the fact that they have the longest, most detailed reviews. I don't feel this will ever work badly for anyone, but you know, in some cases we do just simply get 3 reviews because we were incredibly lucky when we send out the request for reviews. So we normally encourage PhD students to kind of start early, become reviewers, get a bit of a sense of how the process works. And we also try to be more developmental in reviews. I mean, that doesn't always mean it leads to a publication, but we do try and support them through the process, because particularly if you flag in the cover letter that they're that they're a PhD student or this is their doctoral work, then we do try as editors to be more supportive in the process. But as I said, that doesn't necessarily always lead to publication, but we certainly try to have a generally very supportive review process, and also give doctoral students lots of other ways to get involved with the journal and to just kind of move a little bit more into that publishing process to gain confidence and experience.
That is a great question, and feel free to re-ask it if we don't answer it fully. But I'd say one of the main things we do at Enterprise and Society, and actually my primary role as associate editor actually, is to support first-time authors. So one of the main things we do is, I will read a paper before it actually is officially submitted and give feedback on, things that you might want to address before the submission, if necessary, or give you some, hints on how the reviewing process might go. So there's myself, I basically cover North America and, specialize in agri-food things. There's Sharon Murphy, does more than 19th century, in North America as well. Andrea Luch for South America, and I Hisano, who actually also does food stuff, but it's Asian correspondent, if you will. Absolutely all of us, as well as Andrew Pop as the main editor, we will respond if you have questions. If you're like, I've had people send me just an abstract, say, do you think this would fit? And I can say yes, no, or, maybe. I've read whole papers, I've gone over drafts of multiple versions before it gets submitted, so that's the kind of work that we're definitely happy to help support with.
Yeah, I think it's useful to get in touch as well with us and ask if it's something that the journal would be interested in. I don't think there's a fairly broad range with us in terms of what we would be interested in looking at. I think another pitfall I sometimes see, kind of less experienced authors getting into probably, is the way that they handle the kind of dialogue with the peer reviewers. So I think, we tend to, we send our papers out to 2 reviewers. What I tend to try and do personally is try to get somebody that's familiar with the kind of historiography side and the empirical context, which is often quite important when you're dealing with specific countries or industries, for example. And then somebody that knows more about the kind of theory side or the history of theory side or history of art side of the topic. But sometimes that can, and then I try to create kind of an editorial steer and give a little bit of advice as to what the person might do, which is particularly handy in cases where the reviewers might be contradictory. But what the mistake that then authors sometimes make in terms of coming back later is being quite defensive or not quite, so they're not quite following the peer reviewers' advice or our advice, or openly saying that they disagree with the peer reviewers' advice, which then kind of leads us in a situation where we can't really progress your paper much further. Because that's kind of come to a sort of an impasse. And I think a great piece of advice actually that somebody gave the other day in the early career symposium was that once you submit your paper, you're kind of letting go of it. It's over to that kind of committee of peer reviewers who are deciding, helping you decide how to improve the paper. So it's not that they're kind of gatekeepers or should be thought of as gatekeepers, but they're kind of an improvement committee in a sense. They're trying to make improvements for how the contribution of the paper could be improved. So your kind of vision of what the paper looks like is probably not going to exactly resemble what comes out. And you need to be comfortable with that before you submit it, I would say. And that's a really important thing, because there might be some peer reviewers that seem a bit unhelpful or seem to be kind of, but quite often, we find that we're often dealing with papers that we don't know much about ourselves in a sense, so we're not experts on everything. But you'll often find that a peer reviewer will say, well, you've got quite a big area of theory here that you're missing or that you don't at least hit on. And sometimes that's dealt with as simply as putting just a reference in, one line or something like that, just to say, well, I know this thing exists, but so so it's not something necessarily you get kind of precious about, but it's these kinds of just little things and being prepared to kind of work with peer reviewers in a guiding light, if you like, that I think is quite important.
Yeah, it's a great question. And we have a lot of authors who are making their first submissions kind of thing, so it's something which we do come across. I think I'd say 4 things. I would agree with everything that what my colleagues have said. But I'd say 4 things. The first one is pre-submission feedback. So if you're unsure about the fit, unsure about whether or not it is within the scope, get in touch with me as the editor or an editor of the journal and ask them. That's really critical. Second thing is be really clear and thought through what the paper is for. I know it sounds like an obvious thing, but it's actually, you get submissions where there's clearly something there, and it can often be based on good research, but it isn't quite as clearly articulated as to what the contribution is or what the intervention is. what the debate and the dialogue is, and then you're kind of almost relying on the reviewers to do that work for you. But I think if you do that work to begin with, and are clear about in your own mind what you are doing with the article, that really helps. The third thing is, this is again to be basic, but is do keep to the requirements of the journal in terms of word length, formatting. My bugbear that seems to happen an awful lot is that authors submit a manuscript with their name on it. It is an anonymous peer review process. If you put your name on it, we just end up having to create our own version of the document, put it back. It's like a basic kind of thing. Like it does say, most journals say, make sure you've submitted a completely clean version with no means of identification. So things like that. So keep to the journal specification. And then I think the fourth thing is around handling the review itself. It is necessary, reviewing and getting your work out there. It is important. As Kevin said, you've got to accept that once you've submitted it, it isn't really yours anymore. It is part of a kind of shared endeavour to some degree. And we've all had situations where we get the reviews back and it kind of, it's not pleasant. The reviews don't say necessarily what you want them to say. But it is necessary to improve work that you constructively engage with that and are kind of honest about the relative weaknesses or merits of a particular piece of work. Don't be disheartened if the reviews basically say this isn't for this journal. That happens quite a lot. I think everybody would have submitted pieces of work to a journal and then it comes back and says, look, this is actually it's quite a nice piece of work, but it doesn't really fit. It's not within the scope of this journal. So if that's the case, maybe rethink where it goes. And I think also be very organised about how you respond to the reviewers, because it really does help as an editor if the response that you've given clearly indicates how you have addressed what the reviewers have asked you to address. If you are relying on the editor or then the reviewers when it gets sent back for a second round to work out how you have addressed their points, it makes it more difficult for them to do so. So if you clearly organise response letter, that will also help as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm getting wonderful insights from this panel. So I was wondering, as editors of the journal or as publishers, do you have a specific style sheet or some guidelines or some kind of direction? Because if it's a combination of authors from different fields and backgrounds, somebody from management, somebody from history or social science, we have a completely very different approach. I'm a social science person, so we have a very different approach. The writing style and perspectives are very different. Might be very different from someone who is from a management background. And while you are also selecting your pool of reviewers, how do you send these papers, the manuscripts, to these reviewers? Because a reviewer who's from management background might have a very different take or perspective on a manuscript submitted by a historian.
I think I have sort of two parts to the answers. The first one is in terms of the technical style. Every journal will have, what is an article, how should an article be formatted, what does it look like, what's the referencing style, etc. So that on that aspect, we all have to do that, right? We have to adhere to what the conventions are of that particular journal. There's a second part of that though, which is actually understanding the kind of genre of articles in that journal. And I think, Shane was saying that enterprise society is more of a history kind of journal. Business history is more social science oriented. Management history is doing something again slightly different. Essays in economic and business history is fairly wide. But if you look at the style of the articles in there, they will have a certain feel to them. They'll be often laid out in a certain way. We don't insist on a methodology section, but a lot of our articles do have them. So I think you need to think about, go and read the journal. I mean, if you're not reading the journal and seeing what the debates and conversations are in the journal to begin with, maybe it's not the journal where you should be submitting the work. With regard to the reviewers, which is a slightly separate point, getting reviewers is difficult. They give up their labour for free, and the approach really is to try and find, related to the topic, the best reviewers who have the best expertise in that area, and they will then bring that expertise to it. I think some journals, I think we are open to the idea that you can suggest reviewers, or you think particular reviewers might be useful. You can also, as Michael Aldous was pointing out to me today, you can also, the way that you set up a journal article, you can cite certain people because they're in the conversation that you want to have, and then you might then reasonably assume that the editors will try and get those people to review the article, because those people might not be able to, they might have time or whatever. So that is another way that you can kind of try and anticipate who the reviewers might be, because the people who you want to review it, because it's the debates, the conversations that they're having. But as an editor, you try and find people that are the best fit from your point of view. And all of the journals that we have represented here all have multiple associate editors. So again, papers get delegated to associate editors who have particular fields of expertise, and they will then bring their expertise and their networks to bear in selection of reviewers as well.
Starting to get a bit of a queue of questions. Anyone would like to add something quickly to Sam's comment? Got any?
Well, I'd just briefly say, well, the first thing is, read the journal. So, it's just a part of academic work. Everybody has to format things and style things differently for different journals. I mean, I publish in all sorts of different journals, and you just have to do it. But what I would say is, every time I submit to a different journal, I download a paper, it doesn't matter what the topic is, from that journal, and look at what the sort of the general approach is, the style, what kind of headings they have, how is the kind of the bibliography formatted, all this kind of thing, and you just have to kind of go along with that. And I think the biggest mistake sometimes people make is thinking, oh, I just have to publish something and get published, and then just submitting something that doesn't really sort of form up that journal. The other thing I would say very quickly in terms of peer reviewers and the selection of peer reviewers, one of the things that can be very helpful actually is the selection of keywords. So you might think this is a really annoying thing on the journal form when you go through the stages to submit. And actually another piece of advice, I mean, Simon's point there about people leaving their names on. I mean, the thing is, you should take time over these things, you should do it carefully, you should read them really carefully, you should engage really carefully with these websites, and that's, it's one of the kind of common pitfalls really, is not kind of taking a time and taking care to do it properly, and that reading that second proof that you get, or the PDF proof that it makes for you at the end. So all of these things, they're there to help you. And I'd say, so the keywords are quite useful, because it's something that I don't know much about. I can put those keywords either into something like Google Scholar and find people, or sometimes the Journal Zoom system will submit it, or we'll find people depending on it as well, that have already kind of reviewed for the journal and those keywords. So that sort of approach is really helpful actually. So think carefully about your keywords as a kind of signaling mechanism, I'd say.
I'd agree with all that, and I'll just add one thing in that I said that Enterprise Society is very much focused on history, and that's true. But we definitely have reviewers who are not historians. I can think of one I just recently sent out. So the general idea is we look for someone who's very knowledgeable about the empirical content, and then one person who's had a little more distance, if you will, more context, if you will. So the one I'm thinking of, we actually had an anthropologist do the kind of context work.
Yeah, coming back to your point around formatting. So if you ever, and this I think we finally got rid of this at Business History, if you ever see any journal saying they have a format-free submission, ignore it. There isn't an editor that I know who is not completely against the notion. So your point about formatting is really important. The publishers have come up with this idiotic idea, which ultimately just leads to articles being very poorly presented. That gives an impression of your work, and that will already probably set an editor sometimes in a frame of mind thinking like, this is somebody who hasn't taken care of their submission. So looking a bit at the formatting isn't actually as simple a question as it looks. I mean, for Business History, we've actually been back and forth between, do we use footnotes, do we use in-text? So we are now back to in-text to flag our social science orientation, which many people have already mentioned. So the formatting again plays into genre, as other people have already said. So we have an editorial that also explains how can you put historical sources into an author date format, which is an important question. And we give you various options for that. We will still review if it's the wrong formatting, but the formatting plays a large part. So don't underestimate it, but also we're not going to reject something on formatting grounds, right? But if you want to be professional about your submission, it's an important thing. And genre, I remember I was on one of these online panels and Andrew Pop was then, he said, well, the difference between Enterprise and Society and Business History is that if you start a submission for Enterprise and Society with a little anecdote, we take it. But I don't think business history would. And I was like, yeah, you're right. It's kind of like a research question somewhere on the first 3 pages. So the journal point is really important. So also, if you get rejected in one place and you submit it to another, think about, it is a different journal. We might all have similarities, but yeah, there are genre differences between us because we have different specializations.
I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions or 3 if we're really efficient.
Thank you very much, guys. If you have a fair bit of material, what are the pros and cons of publishing a series of articles versus a book? Asking for a friend.
I don't think we ever published a series of articles, I must be honest. I mean, I would really think about, should it be a book? Or should it be, I mean, what we look for is really an article that can stand alone and answers a research question. So for a series, I can't think of a single example, but I'll just check, maybe you guys have published series.
I read your question as saying, should your publishing strategy be more targeted towards journal articles or towards monographs?
Effectively,
Okay, yeah. It's a very interesting question. I mean, I myself personally have faced that very much because I used to be in a history department in the US where almost nobody published journal articles. Like it was a kind of sideline to your core work, which was to write monographs published with, top university presses. Then I came to the UK and I'm in a business and management school where I've been told multiple times, don't publish books, they're not useful. And now we've got the ref telling us that they'll have to be open source, or open access, and so therefore it'll be very difficult to publish with the top publishers to meet that criteria. So I think it very much depends on your specific kind of academic goals, your career goals, your work, how your work is evaluated. It's not about what we think. One way in a history department, I think that when people did publish, I said sidelines, that's not necessarily fair. Journal articles can be field defining, that not all journal articles are. They are, contributions to knowledge, maybe more incremental, but they can be exceedingly important. And so if that's the kind of thing that you want to place with a journal, that's very good work. But you might otherwise be doing books that are, targeted towards broad audiences. So it all depends. I don't think there is anything that we can say directly on that.
Well, every career is different. I think that's the starting point. But I mean, what I found works for me sometimes is to use books to work out really if I've got a kind of a big research topic, or it's useful for that kind of instinct that you have to kind of tell a narrative, or an extended narrative, an extended story, or facets of things that you wouldn't be able to put into papers, and you will end up with many of these things. So I think so if you can do a book that looks at the overall sort of empirical development or narrative of something, that's one approach, and then that doesn't preclude you from taking more specific aspects of something that are related to different theories or different different kind of phenomena, if you like, and slicing it up differently as well, and submitting it to many different journals. What I wouldn't do is submit a series of papers to one journal unless it's a very different, because this is a very different contribution to each. What would be better is think about, look, I've got my empirical study that I've done on, paper mills in the Sudan, to take the last paper I saw, but I'm going to send it to, I've one I can send to Enterprise and Society then, I've got one I can send to Business History, but one I can send to General Management History, but they're different. There might be one you could send to, I don't know, HR journal, something like that as well. Or, so they're different. You might have training in your industry, you might send it to management learning, but there's just different. And the other thing I would say on that is look for special issues that you can publish in as authors, and this is an excellent way for early career scholars, I think, to do things, to get known for something, get known as a person who's done something good on a topic. Once you've got even just that basic level, people might start coming up to you at conferences or getting in touch with you and saying, well, I've got a special issue coming up on this. Would you contribute to it? Or, look out for special issue calls sometimes as well, where you might build a position part of your work, and be prepared to be quite broad and think creatively about how you might apply your work to different contexts like that. And that will help a lot, because special issues have an advantage in that they're time limited. So if the peer reviewers in a special issue, I've had cases where submitting the special issues where peer reviewers have been awkward and trying to block the work, and in the end the journal editor just has to make a decision and say, well, actually no, this is going to go in. because you, because we're gonna run out of time. So sometimes special issues, not all special issues, so I've had special issues that have had 80 or 90 submissions, but on the other hand, other types of special issue will only have 10 or 12, and there'll be less to choose from, as well, depending on the topic. So it's quite a good way to go quite often as well, I would say. So think about that very carefully. So going on to
I'm not gonna, I mean, I think that's been answered. I think we should move to the next
Yeah.
question.
So this will be the very last question, and we probably can only hear from a few of you.
I won't comment on one question. The comment goes to first author question previously. So when I was a PhD student, after a conference like this one, I submitted my first international paper to the Journal of Management History. It received great support from the editor. It received the prize for highly conducted paper, and the citation is more than the H index of the journal. So I don't want to compare this with First Sex, but it's kind of very special connection with the journal. And Emerald became actually the editor of my life. So it's important, very simple first. So the question. Last year I received a very interesting message during a conference, a message to first authors, like PhD students, and it said, don't waste your time submitting to Q3 and such papers, go for Q1 first. And I'm triggered by that because it's job to learn. So what is your opinion? Is it better to go like up to the top first, or is it better to learn the job with, I don't know, maybe lower level journals first?
Does one of you have a particularly strong view on this question? Go ahead.
All of them.
Stephanie?
I mean, I think that you should submit your work to the right journal for the work.
Yeah.
And obviously bear in mind with your publishing strategy what you need to do for your career. So then you tailor the work to your career needs, and then hopefully those two things should intersect, and you're sending your work to the right kind of journal for the right kind of career development that you need.
So I think the advice you've received reflects, as Simon said, where you're located in your career and what kind of department, and that's very different. Now, yeah, you can go just for the Q1, and that's a viable strategy, or you can go and learn and get, more experience, and that A, depends on you, B, depends on your field, and possibly your supervisors. And finally, it also depends on attitude. So one of my former bosses said to me, well, if you're not getting a rejection, what have you been doing? But that's not how everybody goes into this. And if you feel like a rejection will scar you for life, then maybe don't start with a Q1, let's face it. So, it really depends on, well, the scholar you want to be and the scholar you feel you are right now. And yeah, it also depends what your career needs. So I completely agree with Simon.
Yeah, I think the thing is that my view has always been that it's better to be visible in publishing, because you see quite a lot of, so it doesn't really, you see quite a lot of scholars who are kind of quite late in career that haven't published that much, and that's because they've followed that advice of, only go for kind of high level journals. I think it can work if you're publishing with somebody that's got a lot of experience of it, but it's better to build up to it, I would say, and to have experience of peer reviewing for those kind of journals as well, I think is also really valuable, because that's where you learn quite a lot about peer review action and that kind of thing. But yeah, I would say, think about being visible in everything that you can turn your hand to as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you guys so much. This was great.